A 5-hour closed-door meeting in Jerusalem stretched deep into the night. Members of the Israeli security cabinet leaned over maps, satellite imagery, and intelligence briefs. Outside, the city slept. Inside, decisions were being weighed that could redraw the balance of power across the Middle East. The date was January 5th, 2026. The operation had a name, Iron Strike. And the target was Iran, once again. What makes this moment striking is not just the plan itself, but the timing. Only months earlier, Israel and the United States had fought a 12-day conflict that many observers described as decisive. Iran's nuclear infrastructure had been battered. So why was Benjamin Netanyahu back at the planning table? Why was another strike being prepared? And perhaps most importantly, why was there growing concern that Israel might have to act without American backing this time? The answers lie in one of the most intricate geopolitical contests of the modern era, where national survival, political power, and unfinished wars collide, and where the consequences of June 2025 still echo through both Jerusalem and Tehran. To understand how we got here, we need to go back 6 months. June 13th, 2025, 3 a.m. in Tehran. Explosions tore through the city. Air defenses lit up the sky. More than 200 Israeli aircraft, flying over 1,000 miles, launched Operation Rising Lion. This was not a warning strike. It was a full-scale military campaign. For years, Netanyahu had spoken of this moment, from podiums at the United Nations, before U.S. lawmakers, and in private meetings with American presidents. That night, he acted. The scope of the operation was unprecedented. Israeli forces struck over 100 military and nuclear targets. Missile launchers were destroyed. Senior commanders and nuclear scientists were eliminated. And crucially, the operation relied on intelligence assets already embedded inside Iran, operatives who had waited years for the signal to move. One agent later described the night in stark terms, hidden in darkness, monitoring a live feed, waiting. Then the order came. A missile was launched. The target, a ballistic system poised for launch toward Israel, vanished in an instant. His message to handlers at Mossad was brief. The task is done. The reply was just as short. Confirmed. Iran responded with overwhelming force. More than 500 ballistic missiles and over 1,000 armed drones were fired toward Israeli territory. Cities like Tel Aviv and Haifa came under sustained attack. Residential areas were hit. 33 people were killed, thousands wounded, and damage exceeded $1.5 billion. Israelis spent days underground as sirens echoed across the country. Then came the turning point. On June 22nd, the 9th day of fighting, the United States entered the conflict. American bunker-buster munitions struck Iran's most fortified nuclear sites, Natanz, Fordo, and Isfahan. Fordo, buried beneath a mountain and long considered unreachable by Israeli aircraft, was finally breached. By June 24th, under heavy diplomatic pressure, both sides agreed to halt the fighting. Netanyahu called it a historic success. Iran's leadership labeled it the imposed war, drawing parallels to their brutal conflict with Iraq in the 1980s. Everyone claimed victory. Everyone bore scars. The data revealed the cost. Israel conducted more than 300 strikes across 27 Iranian provinces. Hundreds were killed, thousands wounded. Iran's air defenses were dismantled, its missile stockpiles slashed, and its nuclear program, the core of its deterrence strategy, suffered severe damage. Politically, Netanyahu surged. Public support rose. His party gained seats. In public appearances, supporters chanted his name, framing him as the leader who finally confronted Iran head-on. But in Middle Eastern politics, success fades quickly. According to officials briefed on the meeting, Netanyahu warned that Iran was rebuilding its missile infrastructure at speed. Damaged facilities were being restored, production lines restarted. And more alarmingly, Iran appeared intent on expanding its missile arsenal beyond previous limits. The concern wasn't nuclear enrichment, not yet. It was delivery systems. Israeli planners believe there is a critical threshold, somewhere between 4,000 and 8,000 operational missiles. Beyond that point, future strikes would become exponentially harder. Air defenses would thicken, launch capacity would multiply. Iran would become far more difficult to deter or stop. Publicly, he maintained that Iran would face renewed strikes if it rebuilt its nuclear program. Privately, he signaled caution. He spoke of deals, leverage, and alternatives to war, and that hesitation is what now looms over Jerusalem. As 2026 begins, Israeli leaders are once again weighing their options, aware that time, missile counts, and political realities may soon force a decision that cannot be undone. That diplomatic opening, the possibility of a deal, is exactly what's fueling Netanyahu's urgency. Because if Trump reaches an understanding with Iran, if talks succeed where bombs only delayed the problem, then Israel's opportunity for further strikes disappears. And for Netanyahu, that is not an acceptable outcome. But the reason goes far beyond national security. What's really unfolding here is the collision of geopolitics, domestic pressure, and political survival. Benjamin Netanyahu isn't just leading a country under threat. He's a leader fighting for his political future in an election year, under criminal indictment, struggling to hold together a fragile coalition and clinging to his identity as Israel's ultimate guardian. 2026 is officially an election year in Israel. Voting is scheduled for October, but early elections remain a real possibility. Netanyahu must pass a state budget by March 31st. Failure would automatically collapse his government. At the same time, he's under fire over the continued exemption of ultra-Orthodox Jews from military service, a demand from coalition partners that has angered secular Israelis who have endured repeated reserve call-ups during the Gaza war. And hanging over everything is his corruption trial, now in its 6th year, steadily draining his political credibility. Netanyahu has built his entire brand around security. The leader who gets Iran, the man willing to act when others hesitate. The June war initially boosted his standing, reinforcing that image. But momentum fades, crises multiply. And as public attention shifts, he needs another moment that reminds voters why they should stick with him. His hard-right coalition partners are another pressure point. Some openly oppose the June ceasefire, arguing Israel stopped short of true victory. For them, degrading Iran wasn't enough. They want the regime broken. To those allies, restraint looks like weakness. If Netanyahu wants to keep his coalition intact, he has to project resolve. He has to show the Iran file is still unfinished. Which brings us to the central dilemma: why might Israel be forced to act alone this time? During the June conflict, Donald Trump ultimately joined the fight, providing bunker-buster munitions and authorizing strikes on Iran's deepest facilities. But the context then was clear. Iran had just launched a massive missile assault on Israel. The threat was undeniable, immediate, and ongoing. U.S. intervention could be framed as defending an ally under direct attack. Now, the picture is far less clear. Iran is rebuilding, yes. It's running drills, restoring production lines, issuing threats. But it hasn't fired. It hasn't crossed the line into open aggression. Trump has repeatedly signaled a preference for diplomacy. His administration is quietly engaging Iranian officials, with his envoy Steve Witkoff maintaining back-channel contacts with Iran's foreign ministry. Trump's calculation is straightforward. He wants the legacy of a dealmaker, the president who neutralized Iran's nuclear threat without plunging the region into another war. He's already claimed credit for setting Iran back by years. From his perspective, why jeopardize that record over intelligence warnings and future scenarios? Domestic politics matter too. Trump built much of his appeal on opposing endless Middle Eastern wars. While he withdrew from the nuclear deal, he largely avoided full-scale conflict during his first term. His base expects restraint. Another war, especially one that looks optional, clashes with that promise. Then there's international pressure. Gulf states, particularly Saudi Arabia and Jordan, have warned that allowing U.S. bases to be used in strikes on Iran could ignite regional chaos and spike global oil prices. Russia has voiced opposition and offered mediation. China, deeply invested economically in Iran, is pushing hard for restraint. Even European allies are urging negotiations over escalation. Put simply, Trump may say no. And if he does, if American military backing is withheld, Netanyahu faces a brutal choice: pull back and risk appearing weak, or strike alone and gamble everything. Israel does have a history of unilateral action. The 1981 strike on Iraq's Osirak reactor, the 2007 bombing of Syria's suspected nuclear site, years of independent operations against Hezbollah, Hamas, and Iranian targets across the region. This tradition is often summarized as the Begin Doctrine, named after Menachem Begin, the principle that Israel will not allow hostile states to acquire nuclear weapons, even if it must act alone. But Iran in 2026 is not Iraq in 1981 or Syria in 2007. Tehran has already shown it can strike back hard. Those hundreds of ballistic missiles launched in June were fired while much of Iran's arsenal had already been destroyed in the opening hours of the war. A rebuilt, alert Iran could respond with far greater force. Capabilities are another issue. June's operation succeeded because of surprise, deep intelligence penetration, and years of preparation. That advantage is eroding. Iran's air defenses are being rebuilt. Its military is on high alert. Exercises are now explicitly designed around countering Israeli attacks. The element of shock that defined the last war would be largely gone. Then there's the wildcard response. Iran may choose not to strike Israel directly. Instead, it could activate its remaining regional network. Hezbollah, though weakened, still commands tens of thousands of fighters. The Houthis continue operating despite sustained strikes. Iranian-aligned militias in Iraq and Syria could be unleashed, opening multiple fronts and dragging Israel into a prolonged, exhausting conflict. Netanyahu knows all of this. His generals have laid out the risks, intelligence agencies have mapped Iran's likely responses, and yet he's still pushing forward, approving Iron Strike, convening marathon security sessions, keeping Trump engaged, because, from his perspective, doing nothing is the greater danger. Iran's nuclear program wasn't destroyed in June, it was delayed. Pentagon estimates put the setback at 1 to 2 years. 6 months of that window are already gone. Every passing month gives Iran time to rebuild smarter, hardened facilities, disperse assets, and close Israel's remaining options. Wait too long, and the window shuts. Netanyahu also believes, and this point is central, that Trump's diplomatic opening toward Iran is deeply misguided. He does not believe Tehran negotiates in good faith. In his view, any agreement would simply grant Iran time, resources, and international legitimacy to quietly rebuild what was damaged. The memory of the 2015 nuclear deal still looms large for him, a deal he fought relentlessly. He's determined not to see that chapter repeated. There's another layer to this calculation: Iran's internal fragility. Right now, Iran is under intense strain. Protests are spreading. Economic conditions are bleak. Inflation is crushing ordinary citizens. Public anger is higher than it's been in decades. Some analysts have even drawn comparisons to 1979, when the Shah's regime collapsed under the weight of public unrest. From Netanyahu's perspective, the Islamic Republic is vulnerable in ways it hasn't been for a generation. If that's true, then military pressure serves two purposes at once. It weakens Iran's strategic capabilities while potentially accelerating internal collapse. Netanyahu has long argued that Iran cannot be managed, deterred, or contained indefinitely, that the problem only ends with the fall of the Islamic Republic itself. The protests offer a glimpse of that possibility, but they also create urgency. If the regime is shaky, Israel wants that moment to arrive before Iran restores its deterrent power. This leads to a paradox in Israeli strategy. On the surface, Israel appears restrained. Netanyahu has avoided openly supporting Iranian protesters. Israel isn't publicly intervening or claiming responsibility for internal disruptions during this period of unrest. That restraint is deliberate. Any visible Israeli involvement could hand Tehran exactly what it wants: a foreign enemy to blame, a narrative of outside interference, a reason to rally the population around the regime. So instead, Israel watches. It waits. It prepares. If unrest weakens the system enough and the timing aligns, a targeted military strike could act as the final destabilizing force. Not regime change imposed from outside, as in Iraq, but regime collapse accelerated at a moment of internal weakness. That strategy, however, is fraught with risk. What if strikes don't weaken the regime, but strengthen it? What if they trigger nationalist backlash? What if they give the authorities justification to crush protests just as momentum peaks? These are the questions Israeli intelligence services are reportedly debating behind closed doors. Iran, meanwhile, is running its own calculations. Iranian officials have warned they reserve the right to strike first if they detect clear signs of an imminent attack. That creates a dangerous feedback loop. If Tehran believes Israel is about to act, it may move preemptively. If Israel believes Iran is about to strike, it may do the same, each side attempting to stay ahead of the other, raising the risk of miscalculation. Iran's foreign minister has taken his case directly to Donald Trump through opinion pieces and diplomatic channels. His message is consistent. Military force will not destroy the Islamic Republic. Iran is resilient. Engagement is the only viable path. He's offering Trump what Trump values most: a historic agreement, a defining diplomatic achievement, a deal that could be branded as uniquely his. But Benjamin Netanyahu is delivering a very different message. He invokes the lessons of history, warning against appeasement. He points to leaders like Ronald Reagan, who confronted adversaries rather than accommodating them. And he presents Iran as a once-in-a-generation opportunity, a threat that can finally be neutralized if pressure is sustained. He also offers Trump something more personal: loyalty, public praise, support for a Nobel Peace Prize narrative, and the promise that once Iran is contained, broader Middle East peace breakthroughs could follow. This is where the Trump-Netanyahu relationship becomes pivotal. Since Trump's return to office, the two have met 7 times, more than Trump has met any other world leader. Each meeting dominates Israeli media coverage for days, allowing Netanyahu to deflect attention from domestic crises. Trump has even publicly called for Netanyahu's pardon in his corruption trial, an extraordinary intrusion into Israeli domestic politics. In return, Netanyahu has refrained from publicly criticizing Trump's independent regional moves, actions he would have fiercely opposed under any other U.S. president. It's a transactional partnership built on mutual dependence. Trump needs Netanyahu's political backing and the optics of progress in the Middle East. Netanyahu needs Trump's political shield and potentially his military support. But the relationship has limits. Trump has his own priorities, his own voters, and his own legacy to protect. He's willing to support Israel, but he's not eager to enter a war that appears to serve Netanyahu's political survival more than American strategic interests. That tension surfaced clearly during their December meeting at Mar-a-Lago. According to sources familiar with the discussion, no concrete agreement was reached on timelines or red lines for future strikes. Trump made it clear he would support action only if Iran takes real, verifiable steps toward reconstituting its nuclear program. And that phrase, real and verifiable, is where friction begins. Who defines it? Who confirms it? Whose intelligence prevails? Netanyahu laid out his case. Iran is rebuilding missile production, restoring enrichment capacity, and moving closer to nuclear threshold status. Trump listened, acknowledged the concerns, but stopped short of commitment. His national security team is running its own assessments, weighing risks and exploring diplomatic alternatives, all with timing in mind. And that leads to the final, unresolved question. What happens if Israel does act alone? Iran has promised forceful retaliation. It has threatened preemptive action. It has warned that American bases could become targets. Proxy forces could be activated across multiple theaters. Oil shipping lanes could be disrupted. Tehran could accelerate its nuclear efforts in response, pursuing weapons as the ultimate deterrent. Regional governments are watching anxiously. Gulf states want stability, not war. Economic growth, not escalation. They fear being dragged into a conflict not of their choosing. The United States would face impossible decisions. Support Israel despite opposing the strike? Intervene defensively? Escalate to prevent Israeli defeat? Or distance itself and demand restraint? These scenarios haunt military planners because escalation has its own momentum. Limited strikes become extended campaigns. Regional wars widen. And in the worst case, nuclear thresholds are crossed not by strategy, but by desperation. Netanyahu understands these risks. He has been briefed on every scenario. He knows what could go wrong. And yet, he has concluded that doing nothing is worse. Whether history judges him visionary or reckless is unknowable. But in early 2026, as the world watches tensions rise, one reality is clear. Netanyahu is preparing for the possibility of striking Iran without American support. He hopes for U.S. backing. He plans without it. And he is prepared to proceed alone if necessary. Because in his calculation, Israel's survival demands it. The January 5th meeting was not just about military logistics. It was about choosing a path that could define Israel's future, Netanyahu's legacy, and the region's trajectory for decades. It was about answering the question Israeli leaders have wrestled with since the country's founding. How far will Israel go to ensure its survival? And can it ever truly rely on anyone else to guarantee it? For Netanyahu, the answers are settled. Israel will go as far as required. And no, not even its closest ally can be fully relied upon. That is why Operation Iron Strike exists. That is why forces are on alert. That is why planning continues. Not because war is desired, but because, in Netanyahu's view, the alternative is unacceptable. And so the world watches, hopes diplomacy holds, prays escalation is avoided. But in Jerusalem, they are not waiting. They are preparing.